Welcome to Till Death the Academy. I'm Phil, and I'm here with my partner Andrew.
Hi guys.
So today we're at my home bar, the PW, which is my initials, but it's also really an ode to a bar where Andrew and I have been patrons at for the last 6 or 7 years in downtown Lee Summit called the W. And it's where we've learned a lot of what we're about to share with you during this series.
Absolutely.
So today, what we want to talk to you about is a classic cocktail called the Manhattan. And the Manhattan is not necessarily just classic, it's really iconic. It's the kind of cocktail that is transcended time. It's has roots way back in maybe the 1800s, early 1800s, but it's also a simple, elegant cocktail that you can make at home. And it's also the kind of cocktail that you can make lots of riffs to, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can change spirit, and you can change your vermouths. We can mess around with the bitters, some of the garnishes. But glass stays the same, the build stays the same, the integrity of the Manhattan stays the same. It's really a cocktail that a lot of cocktails are built off of. So it's a great first home bartending cocktail to master. And it's always a crowd pleaser. It doesn't have to be on your menu if you have a menued event. It's something you can pull together because it's such a simple cocktail. It's very humble, but very elevated and very classic.
When we first started in this journey, we were both whiskey heads. We liked cocktails that had whiskey in them, whether it's bourbon or rye and so forth. And so we kind of cut our teeth around that kind of group and family of cocktails. And the Manhattan was an easy one for us to get involved in. We probably used too expensive of a spirit back in that day. When we were doing maybe Four Roses single barrel bourbon.
That's right.
At $40 or $50 a bottle. As we kind of grew and as we tried different things out, we figured, these lower shelf spirits, this is Old Overholt Bottled and Bond, and someday we'll do an episode about the Bottle and Bond Act and what that means and how you can kind of like trust a little bit about what's in the spirit and how it's been handled. But Old Overholt Bottle and Bond is like $22 on the bottom shelf or the next to bottom shelf, and it's a fantastic rye whiskey. When I think of a Manhattan, I think of rye being the base spirit, but you certainly can use I've done Irish whiskey, I've done bourbon cocktails, or bourbon Manhattans, but I really like rye, the spiciness of it that it brings.
As a prohibition style cocktail, it would have been made with rye. That was the spirit that the cocktails would have been made of during Prohibition and the Speakeasy. It's boozy, strong. It's going to really hold up to as a base spirit for a Manhattan all day. And if you can get it high proof, you now in a small volume can really punch up the ABV of the cocktail as well.
Yeah. One of the things though about a Manhattan is really the shining star is not necessarily the spirit. The shining star is really the vermouth that goes in a Manhattan. And I'll never forget, Andrew and I both listened to the podcast. It was Eric Castro's podcast, Bartender at Large, when they had on the representative, I think it was the U.S. Person for Mancino Vermouths. And it wasn't long after we both listened to that, we were talking about vermouths and so forth. And I went to, in downtown Kansas City, there is a bottle shop called
Cellar Rat.
That's right. It just escaped I went in there and talked to Kevin at Cellar Rat. And I'm like, can you get this? Can you order that? Kevin has got a great selection of wines and things, and he has enough spirits to keep me happy for the most part. But I wanted to see if he could get this. And so he checked with the distributor, and shows up. There's like 5 different bottles of vermouth, including one that had 3 digits before the cent sign. That was a fantastic vermouth, and it was really out of just tasting those things. If you don't drink vermouth by itself, you're missing out, right?
We'll come back to you and we're going to talk about vermouths, what kind of distillate it is, why they're so important in cocktail build, why they're a great single ingredient cocktail. But if you can get your hands on any of the traditional red sweet vermouths of the Mancino, They are a little bit more expensive than the grocery store vermouths, but they're really great for cocktails. They really kind of they really make that cocktail shine. And before we forget, with vermouths, always in the refrigerator after they're open. They are a wine-based spirit. You should use them up. You should drink them. But they should go in the fridge. They are going to keep better once they're opened up. So if you're ever at a bar and you see their old Dolan red vermouths sitting out in the back, passing the Manhattan at that bar, that hotel or that restaurant, they don't know how long those vermouths have been there. But that's just a little tip we learned from the Mancino brand manager. The one that Phil's doing today is it is a stellar vermouth. And like I said, we'll come back and we'll do a show just on maybe just on some of the Mancino products themselves, because they're just outstanding. But Chianti is the one we'll do today.
Yeah, so they always say maybe good things come in small packages, and this is only a 375 milliliter bottle, whereas the other ones that we got were either 1 liter bottles, that was the really expensive one, right, or 750 milliliter bottles. But the Chianti is such a rich, cherry, fruit forward vermouth that, man, when we taste that, it just screams Manhattan.
Deep. It's not raisiny. It's got that great fruity depth, and it's just dark and sexy. But
you should just, a way to learn about your different elements that are going into a cocktail is to taste them individually.
That's right.
Don't always think that you've got to mix them with something else.
That's right.
Just taste them individually and taste them purposefully to learn about what's the depth and the different things that you can identify them, because as you build that memory bank of things that you've tasted, then you'll be able to start automatically matching different things up with one another.
Phil and I talk a lot about cooking. We both love to cook at home as well, and so much of this journey came from the bartenders that helped us build on the builds. But what they did, the most important thing that our friends in the professional cocktail world was slide a little bit of this across the counter, set the bottle there, let us taste, and let us experience that ingredient by itself. Because you can actually go through and take a sip of this bottle of Bond, and then take a sip of a vermouth, start to see how those come together, hit it with some bitters, try the bitters by itself, feel that spice. With cooking, it comes together with heat or some other way it's going to be bound together. In the cocktail world, it really is just stacked. Maybe ice and citrus change it a little bit, but for the most part, a cocktail is really it's a whole of these great parts, and just like these bitters, and there are hundreds and hundreds of bitters. A couple dozen, maybe 20 or 30 bitter companies that put out 5 or 6 different kinds of bitters. Phil's going to talk a little bit about these bitters, but bitters are the same way. They deserve to be splashed onto the top of your hand and slurped up a little bit and talked about, and how this is going to change this, and how this might enhance that. And so we'll go through some of that, and he's going to talk a little bit about the bitters too.
So the bitters are the binding agent in a cocktail. It kind of takes the other elements and figures out a way to kind of make them a cohesive unit. And the bitters that we're using today are the Bitter Truth Jerry Thomas owned decanter bitters, which actually didn't come out too long ago.
That's right.
Jerry Thomas, if you go back and do some research on him, he's a legendary professor. Back in the 1800s, Professor Jerry Thomas, and he was really a great grandfather of what today has become the craft cocktail movement. His books are, held so high in regard by professional bartenders today.
They've been revised.
They're hard to find. They're very hard to find. But they're so rich in kind of the history and of where the cocktail world has come from to where it is today. It wasn't always this explosive growth, everybody wants to be involved in it kind of thing that it is today.
Yeah.
And we're going to use these. I like these. They just have multiple elements of like cigar smoke and maybe a little fruit, but they also have like bark and things, different units in it that I thought worked really well. With the rye whiskey, and then with the Mancino Chianti vermouth that we've got here today.
Grab the Ango. Let's talk about the Ango as a simple one to start, so people aren't intimidated.
Well, I don't have the bottle of Ango. I've got my Ango in something that's I use it all the time, so it's like ketchup in a way.
Yeah.
You know, that you would put into a cocktail. But Angostura bitters, you can get them even in the big bottles.
It's a grocery store bitter. It's the one that has the label that doesn't fit on the bottle, crinkles on the top. If you hung out at your uncle's bar in the 60s and 70s, it was on the back bar. They were very prevalent in home bars, and then they kind of disappeared for 20 or 30 years, and now they're really accessible. So they're called Angostura bitters. They're one of a kind. They are the standard where to start. But I wanted to talk about that because you don't always have to have something as elevated as this for a Manhattan. A simple Angostura really does well too.
Probably 5 years ago, there was 95% of the bitters that are on the market today weren't on the market.
That's
at
right.
that point in time.
Yeah.
Today, I collect bitters like I do quarters. It seems like. I mean, I just if we're at a place and there's bitters there that I haven't seen before, or there's certain brands that I tend to follow, then I'll just pick them up just to have them. I probably have 50 or 60 bottles of bitters sitting over there in the corner.
That's right.
Okay, the Manhattan. So a really easy cocktail for you at home to remember how to make. It's typically 2 parts spirit to 1 part vermouth. You can play around with the proportions depending on the spirits and vermouths that you're using, but 2 to 1 works really good, along with a couple of dashes of the bitters. So let's make a couple of these cocktails. So we're gonna do, since we're doing 2 ounces of spirit each, we're gonna hit the 2 ounce side of the jigger twice on this. So we got 2 ounces of the spirit, and then we're gonna hit the 2 ounce side on the jigger once for the vermouth. Look at that. Look at how the vermouth changed that cocktail there. And then bitters wise, so I've seen people, like be really kind of cautious about how they're doing bitters and things like that. I like to grab the bottle of bitters, put my index finger below it, and we're gonna go really hard. 1, 2, 3, 4, because we're making 2 cocktails. So we're doing 4 total bitters dashes in there, and we're gonna get enough of it in there that you can really kind of get the taste of it.
Yeah, you kind of have to play with these. All the bitter manufacturers, they essentially have the same top, this kind of thing that makes like drops. Some really kind of fly out of there. Some you have to really coax, but a good dash is really getting after it like Phil did.
So then we're gonna take and we're gonna add some ice. So we want a good amount of ice in our mixing glass here, right? We're stirring this cocktail because it doesn't have any juice, it doesn't have any egg whites or anything like that in it. So we're just gonna make sure we've got a lot of ice in our mixing glass. Ice serves a couple of different purposes here. One is, obviously, you want to serve a chilled cocktail to your guest, but you also are using a lot of spirit, using a lot of booze in here. Your ABV in the cocktail is pretty high at this point, and so you want to give it a little bit of a chance to provide some dilution into the cocktail itself. So we're going to stir it a little bit like that, and then I'm going to grab a couple of coops out of the freezer that are in my refrigerator here. So when you pull them out, then they get that really nice like kind of frost on them, and that's great because it'll help keep the cocktail chilled then after you've actually poured it in.
Before you pour, talk a little bit about the volume of spirit we've put into your mixer as it relates to this particular glass called a coupe. Why the coupe? Why the volume? You'll see when he pours, he's going to hit it right on. But tell me a little bit about why we picked this right kind of glass, the right volume.
A Manhattan's traditionally served up. So that means, that's a fancy way of saying without ice. So it's served up, and we want to try to make the glass to be close to the proportion of the liquid that we're working with in the cocktail itself. And so, we had 3 ounces plus a few bitters and things. So
dilution of the ice too.
With dilution of the ice too, we kind of know what the size of these glasses are and that they'll fit well with that amount of volume of liquid, being a part of this particular cocktail. So let's pour these And since the glass is frosted, you probably won't pick up on how beautiful and rich the color of these cocktails are, kind of right away at least. But we'll pour it out, and it will literally come up just below the rim, so that we know that we've got, you know, a well-proportioned cocktail within the glass. Sometimes I feel like I've cheated the guest if I pour a cocktail into a glass that leaves a lot of room, you know, where the liquid didn't fill up the full volume of the cocktail glass that's there. So in this particular case, we got it right up to almost to the lip of it to be able to serve deep.
Yeah, we're going to show off some cocktails at some point that will be in different glassware, where we might have a giant rock in there, a big ice cube, a clear ice cube. That the ice cube kind of shows off the old fashioned. Most coupe, well, we do see every once in a while coupe glasses that'll have a big rock in it, which is kind of a trendy thing. But most of the time, this is going to be clean. It's going to be right to the top. The garnish is going to decorate it a little bit. There are some cocktails that are neat, stirred, cold, neat, without ice, that's in a different kind of a glass. But traditionally, your Nick and Nora's, your kind of a fancy old-fashioned cocktail glass, all your styles of coupes, they're not going to have ice in them, if ever. So you got a couple cherries.
Yeah,
walk us through the
cherries here. So the first kind of cherry that I've got here is the Luxardo cherries, which, in my opinion, they're like the Cadillac of the category. I mean, they come in this like really rich, dark syrup that, and as you can see, probably the syrup has kind of made the cherry itself really kind of dark. Yeah. It's really kind of a luscious, luxurious kind of cherry garnish to put in a cocktail. And in a Manhattan, you put a single cherry on a pick here. And so we're going to just kind of lay it inside there just like that. The other kind of cherry that I have here, I'm going to grab a pick, is the Jack Rudy cherries. And these look more like regular cherries, right? So they've got the stem that are a part of them, and they're not quite as dark. Their syrup isn't quite as rich. Yeah. And so, you know, they kind of are more kind of like a cherry. I actually like these maybe even better than I do the Luxardo ones. You got to take the stem off of it then. But I like these because they really give me more of like the real cherry kind of flavor that's a part of it.
The good thing about these cherries, these are grocery store cherries as well. Normally you'll see if your grocery store has a decent spirits aisle, you'll find Luxardo, you'll find a couple different brands of these cocktail cherries. Obviously a good bottle shop will have this. You're gonna be able to find them online, those types of things as well. Avoid the neon red, old school, best choice maraschino cherries. They look great. They're what you used to see in a Shirley Temple. They're not great for cocktails. They are great for tiki. We'll come back to that some other time. But for a good classic prohibition style cocktail like a Manhattan, it's just not going to add anything to it. It's the wrong color. It's almost cartoonish. The Jack Rudy cherry, the traditional cherry, you know, you're going to pop that in your mouth halfway through. You're going to eat it. Maybe after the booze soaks it a little bit. It makes a great decoration. The Luxardo cherry, because it's so sticky, sweet, and rich in the style of it, the longer that cherry sits in that cocktail, the more it's going to make the cocktail sweet, because that cherry itself has a lot of syrup in it itself. Yep. So it's going to kind of flavor that. So I like to leave that particular cherry in kind of to the very end. We'll get to a cocktail called The Last Word, which is a great cocktail to drop a Luxardo in, and it kind of changes the cocktail as you drink it. But this is one where the cherry doesn't tell part of the Manhattan story. And so I kind of want to jump in on those cherries, because I think we definitely don't want to do an old school grocery style aisle bright red maraschino, because there are different kinds of cherries.
Yep. So this cocktail we did at our last charity pop-up back in December, Till Death the Speakeasy's pop-up, and many of you asked us, you know, about making this cocktail. What it would be like to make this cocktail? You know, because we're doing some events and things now, we think about the cost of these cocktails and things like that. And, you know, this is actually a fairly pricey kind of vermouth. So we've kind of been able to cost it effectively by using a little bit lesser cost spirit, as we talked about before. So our total cost in this particular cocktail is probably around $3.50 to $4 or something like that. It's really, and truthfully, it might be a little too expensive for a bar to put on their particular. It might be a $16 to $20 cocktail in a bar or something like that.
Because of the vermouth alone.
But because we're home bartenders, we can do this.
That's right.
We can have fun with different ingredients. Really kind of like focus on a great vermouth and how it can really make a great cocktail. Let me serve this to Andrew.
Before we take a drink of this great cocktail, let me invite you into our world, the home bartending world. About 6 years ago, we started an Instagram page called @TillDeathKC. Started chronicling the cocktails we made, bars we visited, some journeys. Moved to New York a couple of times, experienced the New York bartending scene. Cocktails we've made at home, cocktails we've enjoyed out. It's a great place for us for you to enjoy some of the cocktails we've enjoyed, recipes we've designed, recipes we've shared.
Recipes we copied. I never met a recipe I can't copy.
That's right. Alterations to those cocktails. Some shout outs to some of our favorite bars, distilleries, and that's @TillDeathKC, @TillDeathKC on Instagram. You can slip into our DMs, ask us a question. We're going to put some information about the cocktail, the Manhattan we made today, spirits, maybe some substitutes on the vermouth. With the recipe in there again for you. Some information about upcoming episodes. We're going to talk a little bit about glassware, bar tools, techniques, ice.
We've learned.
Things we've learned. But basically the entire home bartending experience. We're just so glad you had a chance to come into our world today, experience our passion for being home bartenders. We hope you have the opportunity to make this cocktail at home and many cocktails down the road. So
thank you for spending some time with us today at the PW. We look forward to future editions of Till Death the Academy. Cheers.
Cheers. Perfect. Thank you guys.